Welcome to the Next Level Human podcast. As a human, you have a job to do. In fact, you have 4 jobs: to earn and manage money, to attain and maintain health and fitness, to build and sustain personal relationships, to find meaning and make a difference. None of these jobs are taught in school, and that is what this podcast is designed to do. To educate us all on living our most fulfilled lives through the mastery of these 4 jobs. I'm your host, Dr. Jade Teta, and I believe we are here living this life for 3 reasons and 3 reasons only: to learn, to teach, and to love. In this podcast, I will be learning, teaching, and loving right along with you. I'm grateful to have your company. Here's to our next level. All right, guys, welcome to today's show. So I'm back with my brother, Mike Zerah. And today we're going to be talking about, I think, something that's kind of a tricky thing for men. We're going to be talking about this idea of the alpha male. And it's certainly one of these things that Mike and I discuss a lot. And one of the things that about Mike, and the reason why I like having him on and want to continue having him on, is that in his coaching as a relationship coach, he does a lot with men and women, actually, but he gets a lot of guys who struggle with this because they're kind of in that age range. You know, if you don't mind me saying, Mike, what are you, 35?
35.
So he's 35, and so he spans a nice age range between sort of these young 20-somethings that are coming of age into their 30s, and also sort of these lost 40-somethings who are, you know, sort of coming out of long relationships where they haven't been authentic. And he's able to help people sort of rewrite their stories in that inside of a relationship. And one of the things that comes up an awful lot is this idea of performing as a male and putting on the act as, you know, sort of the alpha male. And you oftentimes talk about the idea that that's kind of a mistake to be thinking about it that way. So why don't you kind of launch us into this discussion with kind of giving us an idea about this performing that goes on with people who are trying to be the alpha male, and the idea of, you know, the alpha male, the new alpha male is sort of this authentic male. How do we walk through that process?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me on again. I love talking with you and making our conversations public.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a lot of value in it. So, wow, this is a big topic, but I guess I'll start with the difference between performing and being authentic. You know, I got a lot out of Mark Manson's book, Models, and he touches on it really, really strongly in that we grow up in an age where we're so easily influenced by Hollywood, you know, stories, Disney stories as children, and we buy into this idea that we need to be a certain thing. You know, we have to seem wealthy, we have to seem successful or together, we have to seem like we drive this car. We just have to seem. And I think when you buy into the idea you have to be something you're not, you constantly have to perform. You have to fake authenticity, right? And by the way, I was victim to this also. I did this plenty of time. And then when I coach a lot of my clients, the people I work with, it's a lot about forfeiting, surrendering to, you're not going to be this person you think you should be. And let's you coach this in your honor code work, is who is this man, who is this person, woman even, that you really feel is an authentic version of yourself. And we tap into that, and then through the work, we understand authentically, what does this person do? How does he show up in the world? He or she show up in the world. And when you can authentically tap into that being, you're almost, what you do, it almost gets called to you naturally. You don't have to think about what you should say, what you should do. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. It sounds like, and if, you know, I'll just kind of paraphrase to help sort of the listeners. If I'm thinking about this, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, but I think about this person who's sort of man or woman, who's sort of going through the world and measuring how to behave off of the reactions or expectations of the people around them, their family, their friends, their potential romantic partners. And then they start showing up in a way that culture says you should be this way. For example, for a man, it's, you know, you're supposed to have money and be powerful and stand in your power and be assertive and only show emotions at potential times and all of this kind of stuff. And by the way, that's kind of the old way. The new way is you're supposed to be vulnerable and you're supposed to be a little bit more open and you're supposed to be all these things, right?
Yeah.
But that's still, in my mind, a cultural level narrative, instead of just basically being like, wait, how am I? Am I more the strong silent type? Is that who I am authentically? Am I the more sort of verbal communicative type, open type?
Right.
And if I am that, it doesn't mean I can't change and take cues from culture, because, certainly that can make us better humans. So we don't want to just be like, I'm this way and I'm not changing no matter what anyone says. But it's to say not to give up ourselves for the culture level narrative, and obviously to grow if that can help us grow, but to more be rooted in who we really are. And I tell a funny story about this. I think I may have told it last time, but I'll just drive this home. I was at a networking event, one of these entrepreneurial events, and I was surrounded by a bunch of women who are sort of colleagues and friends of mine in the space, and we got into this discussion about men crying, right? And one of the things that they said is they were like, well, how often do you cry, Jade? And I'm like, wow, I don't think I've cried since probably high school. And what was really interesting for me is then what happened at that point is one of them said to me, and she didn't mean it in a negative way. It was just funny that she goes, oh my God, I thought you were such an evolved male. And I think she caught herself because she wasn't trying to put me down or whatever. And I found that was funny because so then rather than like, I didn't really get a hit. I just said, oh, that's interesting, the cultural level narrative in this space. And then I said, well, what would you rather have? Someone who cries all the time, or someone who never cries, or just someone who's just who they are and kind of cries whenever? And it immediately changed the conversation. And I think that's the sort of balance there. Men now, right, old school man culture would have said never cry.
Right.
Today's culture would say you should be crying on a regular basis. And an authentic male, I think, would be like, I'm going to cry when I feel the need to cry, and I'm not going to cry if I don't feel the need to cry.
I couldn't agree with you more. Everything was beautifully said. And I feel like going back to the new age alpha male, like the 21st century alpha male, it's being so, I'm going to use your words now, confidently detached from any expectation or outcome. And you're so rooted in self that if you want to cry, you cry. You don't base your actions or anything off other people's reaction or what you are afraid to get. I feel like a lot in today's world, a lot of people are afraid of rejection. Yeah. So when they go out to a bar or out on a first date or even in multiple dates, they're performing just to avoid being rejected. Yeah. So it's like, I ask my clients, what are you doing? Like, is this something you can sustain long term? The answer is no, to be honest. And you shouldn't. The reason I feel no one should be afraid of rejection is simply because we're always vetting. We're constantly trying to find not only ourselves but the mirror in our partner. Is this someone that I can authentically cohabitate with, be with, grow with? And you can't do that if you're constantly performing. So again, the confident detachment piece for me is critically important in the new age alpha male, because that man, or that man in this case, shows up in a way that's truly himself and not concerned with any repercussions for being that person.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about how would someone know that they're performing? How would they actually, kind of know they're out and about and they're trying to be themselves, and, maybe they're out at a bar, but maybe they're just hanging out with friends, having coffee or whatever. How do you know when you're performing? What are some telltale signs?
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question. But I'll say to encompass it, it's all under the umbrella of premeditated, right? You have an idea of what you're going to do, right? If all of a sudden, you see a fire in the house, you're going to do whatever you can to put it out. There's no, you don't think about, should I go around the side? How do I put this out? It calls to you. So I feel like when I see a lot of people perform, they're saying or being something that's not authentic to them, right? So they're using pickup lines that inauthentic. They are. I mean, you can help me with this one, but I'm sure you've seen plenty of guys go up to women and stand a certain way. They're peacocking, or they're trying to do something to draw attention to themselves. which may not be in their natural being whatsoever. So it's hard to tell. It's hard to see when someone else is doing it if you're not in the situation. Yeah. But it's anything someone does that is premeditated. You're thinking about what to say, what to do, how to be, versus showing up and even fumbling on yourself, like going up to someone you think's attractive and be like, "Wow, I think you're beautiful." That, and if you stumble on that, but if it's authentic to you, right, there's a lot of learning and power in showing up just authentically raw in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say, to me, and it's funny because I think I oftentimes talk about this idea of base level, culture level, next level human. The culture level, we fall back into these states. And so I know that I perform at times, and I can also am very good at telling when other people are performing. And I can tell you, for me, when I see someone else performing, it basically looks nervous. It looks like they are reaching, they're thinking while someone else is talking. They're, and when I'm performing, I'm doing the same thing. I'm essentially, not present and not listening. Kind of being a very different sort of human, right. In a sense. Whereas if I am being authentic, I'm very relaxed. I don't have, I only speak if I have something really to say. I laugh when something's funny. Right. I don't feel like I have to sort of force anything. But you can kind of see when you watch a group of people, something will be said. It may not even be funny. Someone, laughs, or you can see them kind of, trying to come up with jokes and just trying to be something that they may not be. So I think if there's a nervousness there, I think that's already a sign that you are needing to perform. Because from my perspective, anxiety in social situations like that comes from this idea that there's choices that need to be made. That you're trying to figure out, what do I say here? What do I do? How should I dress? What kind of drink should I get? Should I stand a particular way? And you're thinking all these things versus like, I don't know, I'm just going to show up in my hoodie, hang out with people, laugh, be 1,000% myself. And I'm not really worried in the end, what they're looking at, if they're looking at my shoes, if they don't like the way I'm dressed, if I ordered the wrong drink, if I said the wrong thing. It's a very different thing. So I know when I show up, there's zero anxiety for me socially. And I think whenever I'm performing, or I've done that in the past, I have some anxiety. That's how I know. I'm usually very comfortable when I'm being authentic and very sort of anxious when I'm not.
You know what it is? A step further, it's being confident in yourself. Right? Women are very intuitive. They can smell neediness from a mile away. And performing is the biggest act of neediness, needing to earn their affection or approval. Versus when you show up, you can't say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, because if they don't like that, they're not for you. Essentially. Right? And one thing that I stress no matter who I'm talking to is pay attention to the conversation. One thing that I will share that you're performing when you are, when you go on a date, or not you specifically, but you're seeing a date happen, and it's that interrogation, question after question after question after question. It's like there's no listening there. You're literally having a script you're reading from almost to try and get through the small talk, versus if I'm coaching a man, I'm like, ask a question and if intentionally listen to what she's saying, because there's a path you can go down. So for example, if I say, how was your day today? And she says, oh, my day was stressful because of this, that, and the other. Ask about the stressful event. Don't just go to the next question. That is the number one mistake in performing. It's like that rapid fire questioning versus just have an authentic conversation and learn something.
Yeah. And it feels very detached to whoever's in a conversation like that, because it does move all over the place, and there's no deepness and depth that occurs. So I would say the same thing. It's like you're talking to someone, and I think people who are really good socially, men or women, essentially what they do is they're looking for commonalities. I've also noticed this whole thing that I know a lot of women have said to me, and some guys have said about being around, sort of potential romantic partners. There's this idea of some people, especially this is more men that do this, they come at it in a very combative way. They look for, well, why'd you do that? Like, what about that? I don't really understand that. And it feels very combative, whereas a very connected sort of conversation happens from finding a thread of connection and agreement. For example, maybe, someone says, I love France. And you go, oh my God, really? I went to France like 2 years ago and stayed in Paris for 6 weeks, and I loved it. What do you love about France? And you're looking to see these sort of commonalities, and those always end up being the best sort of conversations, right? Like you might not, for example, I love Harry Potter. I'm just,
who doesn't love Harry Potter?
I love Harry Potter, and like I guess when I was younger, dating, maybe I wouldn't have. I mean, Harry Potter wasn't around then because I'm saying my age, but like I probably wouldn't have voiced that. Even if someone mentioned Harry Potter, maybe I would be like, oh, Harry Potter's not cool, right?
Right.
But now I would be like, oh my God, you dig Harry Potter? Like, let's go to Universal Studios and hang out at the Harry Potter thing or whatever, right? It's just that very thing where you begin to own very completely sort of your likes and dislikes. And I like what you said about the vetting sort of strategy. You hinted at it. To me, one of the things that I know that I'm being in my power and authentic is if I am around certain individuals, I'm not caught in my head being like, do they like me? Did I say this right? Exactly. I'm more in my head being like, do I dig them? What's interesting about them?
And 99% of people don't date with that mindset. And I think that is the kryptonite, if I may say, because when you're going into a situation worrying about your own acceptance level, how much is this person going to like me, want me, it's just there's no way you cannot perform. Guilty as charged, right? I mean, we've all, like I said, we've all done this. But when you come at it from a place of, I'm just going to be myself, and I'm going to see if I like this person on a date, or even when you're dating, that's so powerful, right? How can you show up in that space versus the other? It's a completely different mindset.
Yeah. I love the idea, and it's funny now because I can speak from this experience. I'm 46 now. I essentially am.
But you don't look 46.
I appreciate that. It's the shiny head and fat face.
Not at all.
Makes all the wrinkles go away. I always say you can't have wrinkles and be fat. No, I'm teasing. But no, I feel like in the end, at 46 now, if I'm dating people, I look at it that way, man. In no way, shape, or form will I try to be a different human than what I am. But I do also think this is the other side of the coin, as I always like to make it a little more complicated than it is. But I also do think at my age, what you run into is sort of another thing where, to me, there's authenticity and there's sort of owning who you are. But then there's also this idea of being like, you know what, I'm not perfect and complete and do want to grow and experience. And this is the other side of neediness. Someone who's kind of needy and or performing doesn't want to show that they want to grow or learn anything. It's another thing about authenticity that's weird. The other side of this coin is like, I know everything already. I'm 1,000% me. I'm not going to change. I know my type. You have to be a certain way. Like if you're not, I'm not going to see you, right? And I think women do this a lot. And men do this a lot, where it's sort of like, I also am looking now, not just to be 1,000% Jade, but also realizing that I'm not 1,000% complete. And there are so many things I don't know that this person may be able to enhance me in some way, teach me something in some way. And so to me, this is another aspect of not being needy. It's sort of the idea of, sort of vulnerability in a sense, and an alpha male traditionally is like, I know everything, right? And I think this is another subtlety here about being like, I may need to change a little bit. It's not just about being, I'm 1,000% me, like me or hate me, blah, blah, blah. That to me is also a form of insecurity because it shows a degree of emotional rigidity. And I think that we need to also be looking at why we're interested in people in the first place. And I do think it's about growth.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think one thing I'll add to that, and that I've been hearing a lot lately in my coaching, is this term narcissistic male, right? I've heard it a lot this last few months. Like, I'm dating a narcissist. This guy's a narcissist. I'm like, well, tell me more about his narcissistic traits. What is a narcissist? What, to you, what is it? And it's always about being a selfish lover, always about him, his time, his schedule, his work. And to me, being a narcissist is I won't get into this down the rabbit hole, but it is extremely detrimental to growing with someone, mainly in the sense of you can only perform if you're a narcissist because you're constantly acting from this place of me, I want, versus showing up for the partner, for your relationship. And when I try and coach anyone through dealing with a narcissist, it's really like to your point, is this person growing you? Is this person seeing you for your power, or are they own stuck in their being and who they are? And when my firm belief is, if someone can't see you for your power, your unique superpowers, your strengths, and what you bring to this partnership, they don't really respect you.
Yeah.
And they probably don't respect themselves.
Yeah, and by the way, that whole thing is like when that happens in a relationship, and sort of early on there's some flexibility there, but authenticity and sort of being yourself really is about having boundaries in that regard and realizing that, hey, these are my powers. You either appreciate that or you don't. And if you don't, I really don't have a whole lot of time for you. Right. But by the way, the whole idea of narcissism, this is an interesting thing. And I would just say narcissism is a true diagnosis, so it's a very, very overused term. Yeah. So in the medical community, you actually get diagnosed as a narcissist. And by the way, if you want to know if you have narcissistic tendencies, you can take a quiz online, which I actually just did because I was reading a paper about narcissism, and I was like, let me go and kind of see my narcissistic traits. And so one of the other things about narcissism, though, and I know I always kind of complicate it, is that narcissism is indeed, the major traits are someone of exaggerated self-importance. So in other words, they think that their shit doesn't stink. They believe they are the smartest person in the room. They think they've got all the right moves. They think that, whether they have educated themselves or not, they think they're the expert in, romance, or they're the expert in nutrition because they've read one book. Narcissism tends to make you do that. It tends to make you go, well, I've watched a documentary on nutrition, and so now I'm an expert on nutrition. The opposite of narcissism is someone who goes, wow, that's really interesting, but I really know nothing. Now, what's interesting about that, though, is the extremes on either side. You definitely don't want an extreme narcissist, but you also don't want someone who has no narcissistic tendencies, because then they have no background at all. They're just kind of pushed around. So it's really interesting. What we want to kind of think about is we want to find people who are arrogant enough to know that they're special and insecure enough to know that they're not anybody special, right? So exactly. It's like that. Yep. It's both. You kind of want to be both, and I think that is what maturity and authenticity does for a male or a female. They essentially go, listen, I've been around enough to know that I'm not that damn special, that I don't have all the answers, that I have a lot to grow, but I also have been around enough to know and done enough personal work that I like these aspects of myself, and with these particular things, I'm not going to compromise. And so they kind of have this flexible boundary nature about them, I feel like, where it's just like, yeah, I could really grow in that. They're flexible and a little bit open-minded to learn, but they also can be very rigid if their boundaries are crossed.
So the question for you, a 21st century alpha male would have some narcissistic qualities?
Yeah, I would think so. I would think you want someone, and this is where the power principle comes in, right? If we look at charisma, it's power, presence, and warmth. And so the power aspect of that has to deal with some levels of narcissism. We all respect and want somebody who steps up and is in their power, you know what I mean? And essentially is just like, here's who I am, here's what I do, here's how I show up. However, if that goes too far, where it's like, what you do is not important, how you show up's not important, it's all secondary to me. I'm the smartest person in the room. Mm-hmm. I'm the best looking person in the room. No one's a better lover than me. I got it all figured out. That's when it goes too far. So I would say someone who is authentic, right? We have this weird thing in our culture where it's all about humility and don't step out of your zone and know your place and that kind of thing. To me, that's not authentic either, because every human has very defined, amazing qualities that are their superpowers. Yeah. And to me, authenticity is about owning that. And then authenticity is also about saying, you know what? I'm not perfect. I also have extreme weaknesses and dysfunctions related to me.
So help the listener. I mean, I'm trying to help them, because that line you just talked about it's a fine line. Mm-hmm. Like that. I'm so confident in myself and my abilities and who I am, and detached from any outcome. But then help me figure out, like, where's that line where you cross it into I know everything, and so help me understand that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really comes down to when you're in conversations with people, you can see this all the time. It's literally we all know friends like this where certain things come up. They're very argumentative, right? And I've heard women actually use that term about men. They're like, "Ooh, I didn't love it. He was kind of argumentative," and like and I'm like, "Well, what do you mean by argumentative?" And I think this is where the whole thing about mansplaining and sort of being these terms are for those men who essentially don't sit there and listen, but have to explain to you, everything instead of actually being willing to have things explained to them. And so to me, it would look like this, right? Here's the balance. You're in a conversation with a group of people as a male, and maybe it's women, maybe it's not. This can happen in either way. And they are talking about something that you know about, right? That you are actually, feel like you know something about. And what will happen is if you're a narcissist or you have those kind of tendencies or you're a little bit on the wrong end of that equation, you will begin to, or the negative end of that dichotomy, you will begin to want to feel the urge and the pinprick to start interjecting and to start explaining and start to be like, well, I read this and I heard that and I don't know about that, right? But if you're on the other side, you simply sit there and listen and wait for an opportunity, or even if someone asks, right? Like, it's not even that you're such in a place where you're like, I don't even need to, I'm just going to sit here and listen to see what I agree with and don't agree with. And I think someone who's pretty solid in this and they don't even feel the need to interject or say what they know unless they're asked, right? And I think it's that kind of thing, right? So one of the things that a lot of my girlfriends and a lot of people knows, but me and my ex, I was married for 10 years, Jill Coleman, who's my ex, we have these conversations a lot. And one of the things that she oftentimes talks about and I talk about is this idea that we can sit there, if you're in the conversation, you could kind of see individuals who just sit there and listen. And they listen and they listen and they're definitely kind of engaged, but they ask a lot of questions. And then oftentimes when they speak, they have some of the most interesting things to say because they're very insightful because they, and they have sort of that dynamic. And I think that working on your authenticity and working on this balance is where that comes from oftentimes. I've always been at my worst, and I'll ask you this too. I've always been at my worst when I am trying to hijack the conversation, which especially in my younger years, I was like, well, I know about this. I want to talk about it all the time. I want to communicate. I'm at my best when I assume I am the most ignorant person in the room, and I always learn the most.
That's a powerful place to come from. You asked me earlier in our meeting, you asked, how can you tell when someone's performing? They're constantly talking. Then they're not listening. They're trying to really command the conversation or hijack it for their own personal agenda versus listen and have an engaging conversation. So what you just said is actually beautiful and so spot on, because when there's a powerful way to listen where you can add to a conversation versus say something in order to. Does that make sense? So whenever I talk to someone, it's like, where's this coming from? Is it in order to get something? Are you doing or saying or asking a question in order to receive an answer, in order to get what you want? Or is this authentically you and you're genuinely curious? Right? So I find that the narcissistic male, or anyone who's not the alpha male, is constantly performing in order to get something.
Yeah.
You understand?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And that's that whole idea of, sort of this idea of confident detachment, which you and I use that term a lot. And I think it speaks to exactly what you're saying. And I think, to kind of, I'd like to go through a few things of like, how do you do that? So for example, let's say that, you have a situation where, let's say you send a text message to someone you're interested in and they don't get back to you in 2 days, let's say, and you're, someone who's not solid in themselves is kind of thinking, oh my God, what did I do? Now I'm pissed, or I'm worried, or I'm like, why didn't they get back to me? What's going on? Whereas the person who is confidently detached just goes, well, if they don't get back to me, that says something about them, and I don't really need to, sort of worry about that. But, for example, I am very much in someone who likes someone to communicate. I don't like when people don't respond. I notice if you don't have your read receipts on your emails. So I'm looking at it more from that point of view, right? So I more go, oh, that's interesting. So this is a person who doesn't want to, kind of get back to me and is, so I use that to essentially say maybe this isn't a person who I want to be friendly with, or I usually assume at first, I'm like, they're just busy. I just make that assumption because you can make an assumption that they're purposely not responding to you, or you can make an assumption that they're just busy and preoccupied and you just met them and like whatever, and you just let that go and trust that if they want to reach out to you, they will. So I love that kind of stuff, but I know some people, they're not confidently detached. They're full of expectations and assumptions. They didn't get back to me, so they must be with someone else. They didn't get back to me, so they must be not interested. They didn't get back to me, so they must be just purposely trying to, annoy me or ghost me, right? So It's those things that go on in our heads that I think when you start seeing those, you have to go, yeah, I'm not at that place yet.
That's so beautifully said. And it goes again to the 4 Agreements, right? By Don Miguel Ruiz. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So if anyone hasn't read that, I strongly advise you to pick that up and dive into that because it's fantastic. But to your point, literally about vetting, confident detachment, they almost go hand in hand, right? Because if you're doing, say you send that text message and they don't get back to you, versus giving them the power. Why aren't they getting back to me? What's going on? Are they seeing someone else? Are they busy? Or like what? Like keep it with yourself. Vet that person. Like, okay, do I want to be with someone that doesn't have read receipts on or doesn't communicate, hey, I'm busy, sweetheart, I'll get back to you in a few hours? Or does that settle well with you? How does that sit with you versus what's going on with her? Yep. So keep it with yourself. You've always taught that. I teach that to constantly vet. And then I was going to say something. I didn't want to interrupt you, but it was about the types of neediness. Sending that text and following up text after text. Where are you? What's going on? Those essay long texts, that, I'm going to steal your words, that is repulsive to a woman. Yes. But that's only one type of neediness, right? Like, I'm not going to condone that. I'm not going to say any man should do that or woman. Nobody likes that incessantness. But for women, neediness is a feeling. It's that energy that you don't have to send that text message. If you're emitting an energy that is still frantic and showing that anxiety, women are going to pick up on that from a mile away. Yeah. They're going to see it. They're going to read it. So even more reason to be confidently detached from any expectation or outcome and just be good with yourself. Get rooted in yourself and always come back to, am I being who I want to be in the world? Yeah. And if you can stay there, right, and stay detached from, because that's where the anxiety comes from, the attachment to the outcome or expectation. Yeah.
I love this, and this is how I would handle it now, right? This is because there's 2 sides to that. One, let me text. What are you doing? How come you didn't text me back? The other is, I'm going to go black now. I'm going to go dark. You text me, I'm not going to respond to you. That's another form of, to me, performing. To me, how I would handle this, right, and the way that I think a confident male would do this, or an authentic sort of authentic alpha, I guess, would do this would be like, I send the text message to you, and let's assume, just so we have context, let's assume this is someone you've just met. They expressed some interest, you're interested, and you text them. You've had enough interactions. You really haven't, maybe you've been out on 1 date, 2 dates, and you're wanting their attention. So you send this text, and you're just like, hey, what's up? What are you doing this weekend or whatever? And they maybe had mentioned last time you saw each other that they wanted to hang out this coming weekend. So you're just kind of checking in. No response, right? 2 days, let's say, go by. Here's all I would do is just be like, hey, I was really looking forward to seeing you this weekend. If you're busy, no big deal, but let me know if you want to hang out. And to me, that would be if they don't respond to that, that's basically the last text I would send, because here's what I did. I said, I'm not hiding anything. Hey, I'm letting you know I really wanted to see you. I was really looking forward to that. Nothing wrong with that. Some vulnerability in that, yes. It's kind of just say, hey, I was hoping we see each other. No response back to me. At that point, I no longer, being an authentic male, want to deal with someone who is not going to respond to that text. And there's very little that would allow a woman to come back to that for me. I'm not mad about it, but unless they were just like, oh my God, I had the worst week, this and this happened or whatever. But if they just are not going to respond because they got other stuff going on, my interest goes away at that point. And I would suggest that we as humans are vetting people in that way. Don't, to me, don't perform. Don't be like, where are you? What's up? Like really checking in. And also don't do this thing where it's like, well, I'm going to give you the silent treatment too. Simply say how you feel, what you want, and what you prefer. That lays out the sort of boundary that you have, and then they get to respond or not. And if they don't, fantastic, because you've just vetted someone that maybe you don't want that kind of communication. So I set up for me, and I want to ask you what your honor code is, but that's the point of the honor code. The point of the honor code is like, I want someone who's kind, generous, a fantastic communicator, and not afraid to tell me exactly what's going on. It's not going to keep me in the dark. That's important to me. So to me, I look for that in any relationship, male or female, and I also, especially in romantic relationships. And so to me, I just go, oh, this is a perfect opportunity to see, is this person kind? Are they generous? And can they communicate?
You're stealing my spotlight. I can't add much more to this. But I will add, a lot of power comes in the why. Right? If I'm working with someone, I can't just give them the advice, him or her the advice. I have to, ask them questions so they can come to the answers themselves in a way. And the question I get a lot is, well, why do I feel the need to be needy in this sense? Or why do I want to text? I don't have to text my friends 10 times. Like, why? And it can 9 times out of 10 really be boiled down to the story you're telling yourself about this person, right? Like, for a man, it usually comes down to, she looks a certain way, or she fits this idea of who I thought I was going to be with. And that mental story that you already have kind of hijacks all your self-confidence, and you're rooted in self, where you're doing things out of character. A lot of people say, I never thought I would do that. I never thought I would say that. And it's because that story that they come up with. So to understand where the story starts and stops is critically important to understanding your behavior. And then again, being rooted in self. And you can only be confidently detached when you check your story. Like, I'm going to pause the story. I'm going to get back in touch with me, myself, and see where I am. But I thought that was beautiful. So just to give the listener some power, if all the men out there some power, I've certainly done needy things, and I'm not impervious to doing them again, just because I have the awareness. I think that we all come up with these romantic stories that we think, and a conversation for another time is the idea of a soulmate, right? I don't believe necessarily in soulmates or love at first sight. It's kind of love at first story. When someone shows up that looks like that story, that's a lot of hijacking, and that's where a lot of neediness comes in. That flutter you feel in your heart when you see someone. It's like, oh my God, and then you get hijacked. So I don't want to go down the tangent, off on a tangent, but
the final thing I'll say about that, and then we can start wrapping up with just a few to-dos. But I would say that story is really interesting. I'll give you a funny story. One of my younger guy friends recently was having, we live in the internet age right now, so he was connected with the way someone looks on Instagram, and of course that's all we can do, because you see people in 2D basically, or you maybe see a video, but you don't get to really interact with them.
Yep.
So these two, him and her, arranged to meet in another city. They both flew to a city to see each other, and it was really funny. But I was like, so how'd it go? Like, and he goes, oh man, like, she really is beautiful, like she was, but like, honestly, man, I have to say, I'm embarrassed to say, but she had like horrible breath. Like, she just, like, I just couldn't, like, the something wasn't right with her. And to me, I go, that's what's really interesting about our story, right? Because we can write all these things about someone, especially in the beginning. And meanwhile, I mean, this happened to be a very tangible, like, thing. Bad breath is not something you can really overcome. But bad breath also is synonymous with a shitty personality, not being able to communicate, inability to be there for someone and be empathetic. And what we do is we start forgetting all of those things, and because we put the story in place. We're like, they have to be this way because they look this way, and I'll just make them this way. And then you start performing into that story. And again, that's another great example of, once you have a story, you have to perform into that story. When you don't have a story, you can authentically show up and be like, let me see. Yes, this person's attractive, but let me see, like, do I dig their pheromones? Do I like the way they animate? Or how are they around people? So for me now, I tend to get more attractive to someone only after I meet them. And very rarely now do I judge anyone based on looks. In fact, I might even go the other way. Someone who's really good looking, I tend to, have a negative story now, which is just as bad, where I essentially go, oh, they probably have some personality challenges because they've just been endowed with good looks. So it's one of those things where we're constantly looking. So I guess for me now, I would ask, if you were going to say, just to kind of sum it up, what are some things, some take homes that people can, do? Like we're kind of gearing this towards men, but how do they become this authentic, confidently detached guy? Like, do you have one, two, or three things where you could say, look, here's where you need to start?
Yeah, I do. I'm gonna wrap up by saying one thing on what you just said, because I have to say it because you preach it. Beauty is more than just physical; it's an energy. I cannot stress that enough. Everyone listening, everyone in my earshot, everyone online, you guys, it's critically important to pay attention to not only how the person you're with shows up energetically, but how you show up energetically, because beauty is absolutely an energy. Going to the takeaways, I would say first and most important is stories are powerful. Just make sure it's your story about you. Who are you? It goes back to the honor code work essentially. Who are you? Who do you want to show up as for yourself? Not for someone else, not for your family, your friends, your job, anyone. Who do you want to be in the world authentically? Tap into that story and walk into that story. Don't walk into the story of someone else. I want to date a woman who's 5'7", blonde hair, this, that, and the other, works at this job. That's essentially somewhat ridiculous in my opinion. Sorry.
And women who are listening, you tend to fall prey to this even more so than men a lot of times, younger women. So I definitely think that's a very important point.
So my biggest takeaway from this conversation for the 21st century authentic male, get firmly rooted in yourself, flaws and everything. Who are you at your core? And then from there, who do you want to be that's an extension of that core authenticity? The more you perform in this world, the more everyone, women, friends, again, coworkers, everyone will pick up on it. It's not a secret. It's an energy you emit, and you're not fooling anybody. So the more in touch you can be with your authentic self, that's where your life is going to stem from, and that's where you can build off of.
Yeah, and the final things for me, speaking of that, my final thoughts would be like that honor code. Here's how it manifests when you are, interacting romantically. Once you define that, and by the way, on my site, jadeteta.com, for this episode, if you're listening to it, I'll put a link to how to do your honor code there for all of you listening. But once you do that honor code, now the honor code is essentially a way of behaving in the world that you choose for you. But it's also a set of boundaries that you have that you will not sort of tolerate. And so then when you meet somebody, it's no longer performing, because you're no longer trying to say, how do I show up for them to make them like me? But it's more like, how do I show up as my authentic self to see whether I like them and how they flow into that. For example, I might want to be kind and generous and a good communicator, and I might run into this woman who is a much better communicator than me. That's one huge plus for her, where I'm like, oh, she can help me sort of in that regard, and I like that aspect, right? And so it both tells you what you don't want and what you do want, and I think that is the key. So you have to be grounded within yourself.
I'm going to give one last example. I'm a big fan of analogies. So everyone asks me, it's like, so how do I know what to do and not perform? Like doing and performing, it's the same thing. Well, the common analogy or example I'll give is, that of people that excel in their field. Let's take Michael Jordan, for example. Michael Jordan, I would venture to guess, even bet, he didn't wake up with a to-do list. Like, I have to wake up at 5 a.m. and go to the gym. I have to go shoot 100 baskets, 100 shots at 7 a.m. There's no preemptive to-do list necessarily, versus he was so committed to being the best basketball player of all time that with that commitment, the doing kind of followed suit, right? He naturally woke up at 5 a.m. to go to the gym, and then naturally from there went to shoot around in practice. So when you're so committed to who you are, who your being is, you're going to be called powerfully into action in what you do. And right there is a lack of performing, and you're going to act authenticity.
Yeah, and what's amazing about that too is you call people to you rather than you having to search them out. When you're being that person, solidly, you actually call the fans to you, versus having to seek them out. So, yeah, I love it, man. We'll do another one of these soon, but make sure you check out Mike. What's your Instagram handle now where they can
Zerah,
find you?
Mikexera, Mike Zerah.
All right, love you, homie.
Love
Good to
you
see
too,
you again.
man. Thanks, brother.
Thanks for hanging out, guys.